So Noah's son walks into a restaurant, and the restaurant owner says, "I'm sorry, but we don't serve ham here." Okay, sorry. All right. For those who get the joke, good. If not, you're not missing anything. Um, we've had discussions the last couple of weeks about the difference between things that are permitted, things that are forbidden, the middle ground, the gray area of life. And we basically have been discussing that things that are holy are obviously holy, things that are unholy are stuck in being unholy, and things that are the middle ground are it's up to us. Okay. So last week, or last time I should say, which is 2 weeks ago, we ended off on a discussion about items that were a gray area that you pulled down and you brought them to the wrong place, and how you can hopefully free them. Okay, that was last week's discussion. This week, we're going to contrast that with things that are completely forbidden. And this is going to bring up an interesting topic and an interesting question and thought that as actually, if you have the Tanya in front of you, which I'll share at some point, is, as he aptly calls the section, the limits of good intentions. So we tend to think, being religious people and understanding that God is an understanding God, that the most important thing in life is to have good intentions. We understand, obviously, in this world, good intentions have their limits. That makes sense, because I can have the best intentions in the world, but if I do something wrong, the world is messed up, right? I actually messed up, right? I could have good intentions when I'm drinking this, let's say, tea to make myself healthier, but let's say, God forbid, it was contaminated, I would get sick. My good intentions don't matter if the actual item is bad, right? We understand that in the physical world. However, for whatever reason, and I think this is the reason, we don't apply the same to spiritual things, because we believe, and possibly to an extent rightfully so, we have an understanding God, a God who is loving and who judges us in certain ways, with understanding our full picture, that in this case, our intentions should play a larger role. Because again, ultimately, we think it's God judging us, and so God will understand. And so if I try my best, but I don't make it to pray, or I try my best and I don't eat kosher, or I try my best, X, Y, all the different things that we do or don't get done in life, we might think that it's a little different when it comes to the commandments. Because, again, they're spiritual, they're not actual physical items. So unlike my tea, sorry, my nose is stuffed today, but unlike my tea, despite my good intentions, so unlike my tea that, if it's contaminated, there's nothing I can do about it. If I, let's say, plan to eat kosher, and it turns out the restaurant I went to, the owner was a real bad person and was sneaking non-kosher food under the eyes of the mashgiach, and therefore I ate non-kosher. Many people to think, well, big deal. I just, I went to the kosher restaurant. I wanted to eat kosher. That's what happens. And it's not my fault. It's that guy's fault, and he's going to pay in heaven for this issue. And we apply this to many other areas of our lives, where we plan to do something positive. And if something negative occurs, we can always just say, well, we tried our best. The question is that entirely true in the Jewish worldview?
No.
Okay, why? Okay, no, we know why, right? But why not? Based on what we've been explaining in the Tanya, it makes more sense. Because what we've been explaining in the Tanya is there's actually, if you almost want to call it, a physical reality of all the items. In other words, ham is not just forbidden for us to eat, but bacon, has a negative energy to it. So it doesn't make a difference if you ate it intentionally or you didn't eat it intentionally. you now have some negative energy attached to you that you're going to have to get rid of. Now, in your final judgment, when you get to heaven, will God judge you differently if you did it intentionally or unintentionally? 100%. But as far as the negative effects that anything that you do, they apply whether you do them intentionally or not. In fact, this is clearly a Jewish value, and it's expressed clearly in one of the most basic and element of the Torah called sacrifices. Everybody here is familiar with sacrifices, right? The Torah has sacrifices for many different things. I'm sure you've heard of a sin offering, right? What are sin offerings brought for? What do you think? Most people think. What do you think a sin offering is brought
for? Unintentional sins.
Very good, very good. So when we don't, only if you study the Torah, you know that, right? But if you don't study the Torah, you just hear about sin offerings, you automatically assume that sin offerings are for intentional sins. I did something wrong. I want to repent to God. God says, bring an offering, and then we'll become buddy-buddy again. Actually, there are no offerings, sin offerings for intentional sins. You do a sin intentionally, there's no sin offering for you. All right, if you want to say one of the, some of the sacrifices, Yom Kippur, whatever, that the Kohen brings for everybody, it's another story. But personally, you cannot bring a sacrifice for something you did intentionally. You can only bring a sacrifice for something you did unintentionally. And you may ask, what? Why? So you're saying, if I was sleeping in my bed, it was late at night, I got up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom, and it was dark, and I lit a candle so I could see. And then I realized, oh my gosh, it's Shabbos. You were sleepy. You're saying now I have to bring a sin offering because I lit a candle in the middle of the night when I didn't know what I was doing? It sounds unfair. It sounds unreasonable. And doesn't God understand? Doesn't he know that I didn't mean it? Yes, God does know. That's true. But this is what we're getting to, just as we've been explaining in the past couple of weeks. There's a physical, or I should really say a spiritual reality to the commandments. In other words, when a commandment says on Shabbos, lighting a candle is forbidden because there's a negative spiritual energy attached to a Jew on lighting a fire on Shabbos. There is a negative spiritual energy attached to eating ham. I've heard from people. There was a restaurant that people may know here that was found out to be they were serving not kosher, and someone remarked to me like, okay, well, it's their problem. They're going to be punished in heaven. And, that's a natural response. But the truth is, as we've been explaining, that every single thing in this world has a spiritual energy, and your intentions cannot change that spiritual energy if it is not of the middle category. Right? Again, middle category items, intention can bring it up or down. Anything that's not the middle category, meaning if it's forbidden, you cannot elevate it. Okay. And conversely, by the way, if it's holy, you cannot bring it down like a Torah scroll. You cannot desecrate a Torah scroll. I mean, you can destroy it, but it's still holy. You've destroyed a Torah scroll, you still need to bury it. A human body as well, by the way, needs to be buried.
And it's the same negative energy if you use a proxy to do something that you're not allowed to do as well.
What do you mean?
For example, if you had somebody light a fire on Shabbos, it's the same as if from a spiritual standpoint, it's the same impact as if you had done it yourself, correct?
No. So it says like this: Ein shlichus ledvar avera. I cannot. If I tell another Jew to eat, to do something for me, do something forbidden for me, they are not considered my emissary. In other words, if I give someone a coin and I say, go give it in the charity box, they give it in the charity box, then in other words, I can send someone on a mission to do a mitzvah for me, but I cannot send someone on a mission to do a sin for me. So that action of lighting the fire is connected to them, not to me, because they're not considered my emissary. When they decide to do a sin, it's not connected to me.
Even if you say light a fire for me and they agree to?
That's correct. Now, I will probably be judged in heaven for convincing someone to do a sin, but the actual sin is not mine. There's what's called misayeh ledvar aver. There are people who help others do sins, and that's not allowed to help others do sins, right? In other words, if I serve someone bacon, okay, if I serve a new bacon, at the end of the day, though the actual eating of bacon attaches to them, I have to do teshuvah, I have to repent for helping someone sin, but the actual sin is theirs, not mine.
Right, so you would get the hit for putting a stumbling block before the blind or something along those lines.
Exactly. It's part of putting a stumbling block in front of a blind. But at the end of the day, we believe everybody has their own choice. And when you decide to sin, you are not considered my emissary anymore. It's your choice to eat, your choice to light the fire. And so that's what it is. Okay, but a good question.
What if you use one other question? What if you use a Gentile for the same purpose?
So Gentiles is actually more interesting. Gentiles, well, asking a Gentile to do something for you on Shabbos is forbidden rabbinically, not biblically. Now we'll get to soon. The rabbis have forbidden things and they become forbidden as well. It actually says that Gentiles' actions on your behest are more connected to you than a Jew's actions. So in a sense, yeah, if you ask a Gentile to do something on Shabbos that's forbidden, and according to the laws, it's not allowed. Again, sometimes it is allowed, but if according to the laws, it's not allowed, it might be more connected to you than when you ask a Jew to light a fire. Just interesting technicalities. It really goes into the technical of Jewish law. So I don't want to get stuck there too much.
I won't ask any more questions along those lines.
Well, yeah, I mean, you can, but not too far. So basically, the idea is that we believe that there's a spiritual reality, an energy to the things that are forbidden around us, and therefore, regardless of my intentions, I'm going to have to take care of that negative energy somehow. So now comes the question that I would ask myself as well is, but we do understand that God does judge us. God does judge us in a favorable way. In other words, God is the true judge. God can take into account our entire being. So how do we mesh the two items? So number one is, even if you're judged favorably, you'll still need a cleansing process. That's number one. Okay. You'll need a cleansing process, which we'll discuss later in this chapter. So even if you get to heaven and let's say you've done one mitzvah that outweighs everything else, you still may require a cleansing process so you can enjoy and reap the rewards of that one mitzvah that overrides everything else. Number two is there is a possibility of someone who did less sins who will be who may need more a cleansing or maybe more reincarnation or whatever it is. He does take our full life story into account, but that's as far as judgment, not as far as the cleansing. That's how I understand it. I don't know if you have any other thoughts. Be glad to hear. But those are my thoughts on that. Okay, so let us dive right into this. And what's going on? I should not allow anybody to share screens, right? Stop participant sharing. I must have my security settings. That's weird. Just 1 second. I don't know. All right, I'll fix that later. I don't know how that happened. Okay. All right. So let us take a look here at the text. Here it says the limits of good intention. I really like the name of the chapter because again, it really flies in the face of how people think today. So it sounds like this. In the previous chapter, we discussed the case of a kosher experience carried out with bad intentions, right? And so there we said if you eat kosher food with bad intentions, ultimately you can elevate it because it's the middle ground. Now we will address the opposite case, a non-kosher experience carried out with good intentions. Furthermore, there is a reason why non-kosher foods are called isur chained, because even if you inadvertently eat a forbidden food for the sake of heaven, with the intention to use that food's energy to worship God, and not only was that your initial plan, you actually fulfilled your intention using the food's energy to study Torah and pray. Nevertheless, unlike the case of kosher foods, the spiritual power in it will not be uplifted to become dressed in the words of Torah and prayer, because it is chained to the negative forces of the Sitra Achra from the three impure klipos. The impurity of these three klipos, as we've explained what means three klipos, but basically the fully negative energy, expresses itself in an unwillingness to release the energy of the act carried out in their domain. Even if the act was a mitzvah, the most spiritual positive force of the universe, the energy remains chained to the negative forces and cannot be released. So you can imagine, why do they always cut the grass on Tuesday at 12? But can you imagine, you walked into a kosher restaurant, you ordered kosher food, you were given non-kosher food because the guy owning the restaurant is a terrible person, and then you go and pray, and you literally believe in your mind that you've just done the holiest things, and you ate that food with the purest of intentions. Unfortunately, that energy is changed. It cannot be elevated. He says like this is even the case when the prohibition is rabbinic. Here, Tanya makes a bold assertion that even the energy of food prohibited by rabbinic law is powered by the impure klipos that cannot be released to God. This is an interesting line, an important line, because we may think that only things that are forbidden by the Torah, but rabbinic stuff, maybe there's more leeway because it didn't originally have a negative energy, right? When God first gave the Torah, when the rabbis didn't say anything, it didn't originally have a negative energy, but now it does have a negative energy. That's the idea. It now has a negative energy. This seems counterintuitive since the klipos were put in place by God to power his universe. If an object was biblically permitted and the rabbis outlawed it, how could that object's energy change from its original divinely allotted klipos noga to impure klipos, right? How are the rabbis taking something that God said is middle energy and they're saying no, right? They're changing, so to speak, the energy that God gave it. How does that work? It was in response to this concern that the following line was written. For the words of the scribes are even more stringent than the words of the Torah. This is from the Talmud Eruvin. While rabbinic law is legally speaking secondary to Torah law, Judaism has an equal, if not greater, reverence for the enactments of the rabbis. This reverence, as the Tanya suggests, is indicative of a special spiritual power granted to the rabbis, scribes, if they decreed an object forbidden. The spiritual energy of that object will actually change from klipas noga, the middle energy, the gray area, to the impure klipos. So that is a powerful line to really think. And obviously we believe this, that the rabbis have the ability to change the spiritual energy of an item. Well, okay, before we get into how that works, but assuming you do believe in that, which I hope you do, now you hope that it creates a greater respect for what the rabbis forbid, because many people are very easy to dismiss what the rabbis have said. Well, it's just the rabbis, it's not in the Torah. You have to understand that if the rabbis have forbidden it, it now has a negative energy. And so you can scoff all you want, but you're kind of, it's got a negative energy and there's nothing you can do about it. There's nothing you can do about it. All right, so now people want to understand, how is it possible that the rabbis have been able to change the energy of an item? Okay. Anybody's any thoughts? How can the rabbis change something that God himself permitted, that God himself said is okay? Any thoughts?
But you can't.
You can't?
I mean, you're not supposed to add or take anything from what the Torah says.
Okay, so the Torah says that you cannot add or subtract, right? The Torah said, right? We read in this last week, right? The Torah says you cannot add or subtract commandments. What that means is that you cannot say that there is a new commandment that is biblically binding, and you cannot say that one of the commandments of the Torah does not apply anymore. However, what you can do is you can say this is the Torah law, and the rabbis are saying we also want you to do this, right? Right? Does that make sense? Esmeralda, still there?
Oh, yes, I'm here. Sorry, I was muted.
I don't
Yeah,
You're correct. We cannot, the rabbis cannot come and say there is another biblical commandment. The rabbis cannot come and say there is 612 commandments. They cannot say there's 640 commandments, but they can say there's 630 commandments. And then the rabbis have added a couple items. They can do that, right?
but isn't that adding anyway?
The Torah says, there are different lines of the Torah that hint to this idea that the rabbis have the power, but of course, generally says you should listen to the rabbis. It also says that you should make guarding for my guardings, meaning we should make fences for God's laws, right? As I've explained.
Right, but nothing that's going to override what he already said.
That's correct. It's not overriding. So in this case, what it is like this. For example, God said, don't cook, let's say meat and milk together. And the rabbis now add, don't cook chicken and meat. The rabbis can add a negative energy to chicken and meat. Now you may ask, how can they, they're adding a negative energy to something that God himself did not place on it originally. That's what they're doing in that case. You may ask practically, so why would it originally be permitted only for the rabbis to forbid it later? One way to understand it, I think, as we've explained in last class, is that our understanding is as the ages have gone by, our ability to elevate certain items become less and less. In other words, previous generations had less rabbinic enactments because they were of greater spiritual stature and had a greater ability to refine more items in the world. That's the spiritual understanding of this, is that as time goes on, the rabbis forbid things and give things a negative energy because those are items that we cannot elevate anymore. We also have to understand that the rabbis are not just making things up. Our belief also, as far as the rabbis go, is that what the rabbis forbid is originally part of God's plan, because God wants certain things to come out over time, right? Does anybody here believe that God wants us to light the Hanukkah menorah on Hanukkah? Does anybody, or I should say,
It's not commanded, but I'm pretty sure he will be happy with that.
Right. When Hanukkah comes, does God want you to light the Hanukkah menorah? I think
Yes.
Yes. Or even Shabbat candles, but it's not in the Torah. Does God want you on Shabbat to light Shabbos candles?
As part of making Shabbat holy.
All right. There's no commandment, none of the commandments in the Torah to light Shabbos candles.
And also a tradition.
What?
It's also a tradition.
It's actually one of the 7 mitzvahs of the rabbis. We throw the word mitzvah. The rabbis actually made only officially 7 mitzvahs. They made a lot of things they tell us to do, but they made officially 7 mitzvahs. One of them is to light Shabbat candles. Now, everybody that lights Shabbat candles makes a blessing, who has commanded us with his commandments to light the Shabbos candles. Well, if God, we should apply the same logic. If God wanted us to light Shabbos candles, he should have just told us. Well, the answer is there's certain things that God wanted that should come from us, that should be revealed at a later time. One reason, as I said, for forbidden items is because over time, our ability to refine things becomes less. Another reason is as time goes on, we need more actions to keep us more involved. We need more spirituality, so there become more actions, more mitzvahs, more things to do. but our belief is that God, when the rabbis make these commandments, these rabbinic commandments, I should call them, and these enactments and these things that they forbid, our belief is, if you're a religious view, of course, is that that's what God wants. And God wanted that it should be revealed to the rabbis in later generations. If we don't believe that, then really I wouldn't listen to the rabbis either, to be honest. I only listen to the rabbis because I believe that's part of God's will. And that's how
But
God wanted it to happen.
sometimes the rabbis have a lot of different opinions on things, and it's a little bit confusing because you don't really know which one you are going to follow. And like, you're following this one, does that mean that you are violating the other, the other options? I don't know.
Good question. Let's give a good example. Is an Ashkenazi Jew who eats rice on Pesach, on Passover, is he partaking? Ashkenazi Jew partaking of rice on Passover, are they partaking of a negative energy for them while the Sephardi man is sitting right next to them and eating rice? Right? So Ashkenazi Jews don't eat rice on Passover.
My husband is Ashkenazi, and we do certainly the Sephardic custom in our house. And I think it's fine.
Okay, well, I don't know everybody's household how they accept customs. Okay, customs can, depending on the marriage situation. But okay, let's say me. Okay, I'm Ashkenaz, and no Sephardi in my family, very very far up. Okay, my family has not been eating rice for a long time. If I were to eat rice on Passover, would that be a negative energy for me?
Yes.
I think so. That would be my understanding. Again, Tanya is not talking about minhag. I think I once was reading about it. How does it actually work? How can there be the same item that's permitted for one person and forbidden for another? There is an explanation on it. I don't have it in front of me, but these are good questions, and they are ideas that can be discussed, and they're all based on
the extra days of the holidays and diaspora. I mean,
that's
people in Israel don't have to do those, and people in the diaspora do.
That's a good point, right? Exactly. So if you're outside of Israel, we believe the second days of every holiday has a special spiritual energy that does not exist in Israel on that day, right? And literally, we believe the rabbis have taken a weekday and made it a holy day. Okay, to the point where
don't you follow the practice where you live, even if you're in a place where you would follow the other practice if you had lived there? In other words, if you went to Israel, aren't you supposed to, like if you went on a trip, wouldn't you have to observe that last day?
That it's a debate amongst the rabbis. The Chabad rabbis would say yes.
Right.
Yes, but other rabbis would say no. But I think the Chabad worldview is also based on the idea of the spiritual energy. Our belief that there's a spiritual energy in Israel, and therefore when you go to Israel, you keep one day. And when you come to America, it's actually a little different. They say you keep the second day, but not entirely. Like if an Israeli comes to America, they'll put on the second day of Yom Tov, they'll put on tefillin in a hidden manner so nobody sees. But I actually was going to talk about that's an interesting thing. So let's say the second day of the holiday of Shavuot, without the rabbis, the second day of the holiday of Shavuot would have been a weekday. And if it would have been a weekday, we would have put on tefillin. Yet we are not putting on tefillin, and there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, that's the way we should be doing it. The rabbis have, in a sense, changed the spiritual energy of that day. I think it's quite a remarkable thing. So again, all this, we have to believe that the rabbis are divinely inspired. Now, what makes it hard to believe that the rabbis are divinely inspired is the fact that there are many rabbis that have many different opinions. Now, if someone really wants to read about how this works, the spiritual, how do you balance this idea that there's, the rabbis have a lot of, all the spiritual power, yet they disagree. I highly advise you to read. There's a book. I'm gonna put it up here on the screen. It's a great book explaining how does it work. All the rabbis debating in the Talmud. It's written, by the way, by the same author that translated the Tanya that we're using. And let me see if I can pull it up here. Yeah, it's over here. Okay. You can probably find it on Amazon too. I'm just showing you what it is. And I have a copy in my house as well. It's a great book. It's called Rambam, 13 Principles of Faith. And it's the volume called the Torah. So it talks all about this, the Torah, how is, Deuteronomy divine as well, and how does it work with all the debates? How can we say that all the different rabbis disagreeing? How do we understand all of that? So this to me is just a mind-boggling great book. It's not a simple read. It's not a difficult read either. It's not like a book, like just flip pages book. You got to think. But if you're interested, what?
I have the book. I didn't start reading it. I got it the other day.
Which one? There's two of
This
them.
one, the one they have on the screen.
Okay, all right. So then read it. I think anybody who is disturbed by all the debates and how they're all godly, and how the rabbis disagree with God. I haven't read it in a while. That's why I'm not so sharp on this right now. But it is a great read and a great book, and we'll explain to you a lot of these things. So if you got the book, you're a step ahead. And if you don't have the book, a great idea to buy it. And again, it's written by the same author that translated the Tanya that we're using. So he's a good author. And I know him as well personally. And again, it's called well, I can put a link in the thing. You probably find it on Amazon as well.
It said Rambam.
Yeah, it says Rambam. Rambam is just basically, he calls it Rambam because he's basing the book off of the Maimonides' 13 Principles of Faith, but it's mostly actually from the teachings of Hasidic philosophy. But I put it in the link. Oops, I messaged for one person. Let me message everybody over here.
It's on Amazon, but because that's where I got it from.
Okay, yeah, okay.
It took like a week or something to deliver, but
Okay.
I got it.
Probably a third-party seller. All right. So now that we've gone to these important discussions, because these are important discussions to have, and I think they're born out of what we're discussing. In other words, once you have a belief in spirit, in other words, if we don't believe in these spiritual energies that are actually exist, then these questions don't apply, right? In other words, otherwise we could just say, well, the rabbis don't want you to do something. But the moment we say everything has a spiritual energy to it, and the rabbis can add a spiritual energy, that's when we start to think more about this. That's when we start thinking, wow, who are these rabbis to even do this? So again, our discussion here today is adding on to our worldview understanding, and it makes us question more about the power that the rabbis have. And therefore, that's why we got into this discussion, because again, it's based on what we're discussing here. And that is, again, that every item that's permitted or forbidden has a specific spiritual energy. And as I said earlier, therefore, your intentions to an extent cannot change that reality. Particularly when we're talking about forbidden things. See something like this. Now, he's going to say an interesting line, and we're going to get back inside. Oh, I wanted to say one more thing. So what about a tzaddik? What about somebody who's righteous, who, if inadvertent sins are bad to the point where we need to be cleansed for them and we need to bring offerings? What about tzaddikim? What about this purely righteous people? How can we say they do bad things, right? What if they sin by mistake? Well, the answer is, our tradition is, that actually the fact that we do inadvertent sins is because we are more connected to the unholy parts of our lives. In other words, the fact that I can get up in the middle of the night and possibly light a candle is because I'm not so pure and holy. I have more of a connection to the negative energies already in my life. Negative energy pulls negative energy. So if you're already a person that's done negative things and you've drawn negative energy into your life, you'll be more drawn to do those things, possibly inadvertently. It says that actually a tzaddik will never sin inadvertently. It says God protects them. Why? I think the spiritual answer is they really don't have negative energy in them. They're not really drawn to doing those things, even inadvertently. There's nothing behind their psyche, but also on a very practical level. I would say someone who really thinks about, a tzaddik who's really involved in Shabbat, and Shabbat is so meaningful to them, they would never forget Shabbat. You know, even wake up in the middle of the night, they're so conscious of Shabbat, they wouldn't just wake up in the middle of the night and forget Shabbat. For us, me included, I'm saying, all right, I remember Shabbos now. All right, I go to sleep, I wake up. And honestly, I probably would make less mistakes than other people, right? As I'm more involved in Shabbat than maybe other people. The more involved, this is just from a very practical note, the more involved you are in something, the less likely you are to make mistakes, right? I'm sure there are a lot of people who maybe forget to put on tefillin a day here, a day there. They may not yet be in that mode where prayer is that important, or where prayer is, something they do and never miss, right? So that's just a practical perspective, is that to an extent, we could say the fact that we do inadvertent sins is a sign that we may not be as involved as we should be. And that may lead to us making mistakes. Okay, we're not as careful. And number two is going from the spiritual perspective. Our belief is that the negative energies that have attached themselves to you throughout your life, because you're not perfect and neither am I, draw us to doing things sometimes inadvertently, which is why we need to bring sin offerings. Because the fact that we were able to sin inadvertently does show that we have a certain negative energy within us. And so when we bring in the sin offering, it is not just because I sinned and therefore I attached myself to the negative energy in that sin that would be there whether I wanted to or not. The fact that even sin to begin with is a sign that there's some type of negative energy within me, and therefore I really need to do teshuvah. Because if we don't look at it like that, then we can just say, well, you know what, I understand. Otherwise, we can be almost resentful, like, well, now I got to be clean, cleaned up because something stupid happened by mistake. Well, we have to have an appreciation that even when we sin inadvertently, it's probably a sign of something inside of us. If you want to go spiritual, a spiritual negative energy that has attached to us throughout our lifetime, or you want to go more practically, in a practical sense, we're probably not as involved in holy things as maybe we could be. And to me, that's a very practical note from all of this. People who are generally involved in a certain field make less mistakes in that field, in that arena. Just how it is. Okay, not that they can't, and that's why I gave the spiritual idea to it as well. Okay, any questions or comments on that point? Or thoughts? Because I think it's an interesting and important point. Yes, Adam.
Well, I mean, my thought is that I think it's like this is life. I mean, even Moses sinned, right? And it's part of our journey, right? God has given us a journey, right? It's being in it. It's not a destination, right? So what I see is this is all part of it. And when there is a inadvertent sin, I mean, then there's a consequence of that, and that would be the sin offering. And there's something spiritual about it having to do that. So it's not like something to avoid.
Right. And I would add, based on what I said earlier, that you should really make sure that when you bring the sin offering, you end off more spiritual than before you sinned.
Yeah, I mean,
right.
Yeah, because it's
right.
Yeah, because I'm not, when we say the word sin, it's almost like there's a bad connotation. Negative, right. A bad connotation. When positive and negative, right? Which would you rather have? You would rather have positive. But that's about everything. There's always action and reaction. There's they work together, and it's what I see is it's part of God's plan.
Right. Well, you're bringing up an important point, and that's really another point I really should stress as well, is that we want to make sure when we do an inadvertent sin, we're not just focused on cleansing that sin because, I brought upon myself a negative energy, I need to get rid of it. But as you said, we need to make sure it's part of our life's journey so that we are at a higher place when we cleanse ourselves from that sin than before we started.
Yes.
Before we did. So we're not just focused on getting back to where we were. We want to focus on bringing ourselves to a higher place.
Okay, perfect. I love it.
Okay, good. All right. So now let us continue over here. Okay. So who's Ben? Okay, let's go. Kidding. All right. So let's go. He said now he's going to say something interesting. He says, therefore, the Yetzer Hara, the impulse to do evil and desire to forbidden things, does not originate from the animal soul of Klipas Noga, which is an intermediate energy, but from an external influence, namely one of the foreign demons, which has the energy of the Yetzer Hara of wicked nations of the world, whose souls are from the three impure Klipas. We explained in chapter 2 that not the kind nations, but the wicked nations of the world, or wicked people of the world who are not Jewish, wicked people have a soul energy from the purely impure klipos. Okay, we explained that in chapter 2. So the Zohar says similarly, our desire for bad sins is coming from almost like a foreign demon inside of us, because our animalistic soul is from the middle energy. So where we deciding to sin is coming almost from a foreign energy. Now, this is an interesting point. It's hard to explain. It's a little Kabbalistic, and the Tanya really doesn't spend a lot of time on this, but I saw a beautiful explanation by Rabbi Steinsaltz. Those are the Rabbi Steinsaltz. This is the Hebrew version of his Tanya, but he has a great English version of his Tanya. He explains like this. He says, in life, there's we understand in any society, there are certain sins or moral decadence that's considered kind of normal, and then there's abnormal, right? So there are certain sins that are considered normal and they're abnormal. I mean, you could probably look on TikTok, right, or on YouTube. You can see people doing things that are normal or the things that are abnormal. I don't know what's abnormal. One of those kids that were one of those dangerous TikTok things, right? Like swallowing Tide Pods. Okay, it was a craze for teenagers. Swallowing that's an abnormal desire, right? That's not obviously they had a desire themselves to do it, but that's an abnormal desire. Okay, that's a little bit what we would call beyond the pale. Today, it's hard to really find things because today we've gone so far where we accept everything, right? And there's not too many moral red lines. But regardless, this is the idea. And this is what the best explanation I got on this section of Tanya. Rabbi Steinsaltz is basically saying that we have to appreciate that for us as a Jew, the desires to sin with forbidden things is kind of considered abnormal for us. Just we should understand that. And this also harkens back to actually a sermon that I just gave on Shabbat, is that really the idea of Teshuvah is realizing that our real self is our godly soul. It's what I spoke about on Shabbat. Is repentance and return to God really just means recognizing that our real self is our godly soul and wants to do the right things. And the sins is not our real self, not the real me. And so when we return to God, we basically say, I want to return to my true self. That's why I brought from Rabbi Levius like a Pinchas. It says we never find that a Jew says a shachianu on a sin, right? You say a shachianu on a mitzvah. You never say a shachianu on a sin. Anyways, let me get back in, because again, this is just a kind of a side point, but just not really side, but a little hard to explain. Anyways, it's something like this. Your temptation to sin, I'm going to skip this. I'm going to go to the bottom of the page. On the other hand, the Yetzer Hara desire to satisfy yourself with kosher pleasures comes from what the Zohar calls one of the Jewish demons, Klipas Noga, for even though the pleasure-seeking impulse can cause you to forget God, it can easily revert to holiness, as explained above with the realignment of attention. Nevertheless, before it reverts to holiness, even this kosher act is still negative, so it is powered by Sitra Achar Klipa, since it is not carried out for a higher purpose. That's what we said last week. Again, the idea that when you do a sin with something that's permitted, when you use permitted items purely for pleasure, you pull them down for a while, but then afterwards they can come up. Okay. The next section over here is called Klipa detoxification. So we've all described that our good intentions don't matter if we're actually taking something forbidden, because there's a negative spiritual energy. So how do we get rid of it? Especially today, we don't have the animal sacrifices. How do we get rid of it? So he's going to explain something which is not often talked about in Chabad Hasidic philosophy, and that is the idea of purgatory. Purgatory, the idea of what some people might call punishments. Okay, many streams of Judaism and other religions as well focus a lot on the punishments. It's kind of their way of inspiring you to do the right thing. They tell you, maybe some of you when you were kids also got it from your mothers, right? If you stand with you get fat feet, right? Things like that. I was reading some great comics by Charles Schultz yesterday. Peanuts, and there was one scene of I think Linus eating his lunch from his goodie bag, and his mother also left him this long, guilt-inducing note. So he says, for lunch I'm getting a peanut butter sandwich and a healthy dose of guilt. That's how he described it. So a lot of people like to use guilt to inspire for Judaism. Now, maybe it works for some people. Actually, I should say it does work for some people, but it also doesn't work for many others as well. Chabad Hasidic philosophy generally stays away from that type of rhetoric. In other words, saying, well, if you sin, you're going to burn, and imagine all the angels coming at you and throwing spears and sticks at you, and then you're going to be burned in the fire, and then they're going to toss you over and put you on a spit, and all the different things that they could tell you. Okay, we like to focus on the positive. The Tanya here, though, is going to focus on the negative for a moment. And the reason is we have to understand it in context of the greater Tanya, because the Tanya doesn't talk about it a lot. The reason for the description of the punishments here, and actually they're really cleansing, as I've said many times, is to show us the severity of what we're doing. In other words, not to say this is the way I'm going to inspire you to get you to do the good, but to help you to understand what doing these things does to your soul, what spiritual energy it brings to you. By looking at the cleansing process to get rid of it, you can understand what it does to you. But that being said, are these telling you the punishments? Is that likely to get you to do the right thing? For most people, the answer is no. Okay, just hearing what happens to you for doing this sin or doing that sin is unlikely to get you to motivate you to do the right thing. So why are we mentioning it? Again, to help you appreciate this negative spiritual energy of that sin. By the way, the Rabbi once said a very similar concept about all the punishments in the Torah. When you read the Torah, it's full of all these punishments, and we don't really do them today because we don't have the court anyways. And also, even to get the punishments is very hard. You'd have to be warned by two witnesses, and they tell you what exactly would happen to you if you do it, and then you'd have to go ahead and do it. So people generally wouldn't get these punishments. So what's the point in the Torah telling us these punishments? One explanation is to help us appreciate the importance of these commandments or the important or the negative energies of these sins. When the Torah describes a certain action, it has a certain punishment. It helps you appreciate the powerful negative energy that sin carries, which therefore has that punishment, even though in almost any scenario you would not get that punishment. Okay, so let's be practical. For example, the Torah describes the death penalty for Shabbat. Okay, if you desecrate Shabbos, you get a death penalty. Okay, why am I telling you guys this? I'm not hiding anything. Okay, the Torah describes you desecrate the Shabbos, you get stoned. Okay, get stoned sounds terrible. It is terrible. Now, practically, how would you actually get stoned? So first of all, we'd have to go back to the times when we had the Sanhedrin. We'd have to be back in the land of Israel. And then what would have to happen? Well, it doesn't be the land of Israel, but you have to have the Sanhedrin. And the rabbis have to have a certain type of smicha, which we don't have today, certain type of ordination. And then you'd have to, so let's say you'd want to light a fire on Shabbat. Okay, so you go to your backyard, you have a bonfire, you want to light it, you want to roast the marshmallows. As you're about to roast the marshmallows, two witnesses come to you and say, if you light that fire in front of us, your punishment by the high court will be to be stoned. Do you understand? And the guy says, yes, I understand it. He goes ahead and he lights his bonfire. Now, how dumb do you have to be to go ahead and light your bonfire when two people warned you? Conversely, if you go to light your bonfire and there's no witnesses around, or there are witnesses and they don't warn you, or they warn you and you don't say that you understood what they said, the court cannot put you to death. So again, even if they walked over to you and they told you exactly what's going to happen if you do it, and you went ahead and did it, if it's not clear that you heard them and understood what they were saying, you would not be put to death. So let me ask you, so how often was the death penalty actually done for people who desecrated the Shabbos? It wasn't a lot. It couldn't be a lot, because how many people would be that dumb? Wait till the witnesses walk away, then light your fire.
There is an example in the Torah where a guy is killed.
There was one guy who was killed, correct? He was lighting fire on Shabbos, but he was obviously warned. He had the witnesses, he was warned, and he went ahead and did it. Of course it happened. I'm just saying it rarely happens. So what message is there in the Torah by telling us these punishments? It's to help us, especially today. This also helps us understand today. It's to help us understand and appreciate the power of these actions. Now, I understand a lot of people here in this call, myself included, are not perfect. And we all have done things that are liable at the very least for death by heaven, called kares. Okay? This is a lot of things, kares. You know? So my point here to you today is the Torah, when it tells us these punishments, is to describe to us the power of the negative energy that they have, so we can understand and appreciate just how important they are. And the same thing is going to be the Tanya here when it tells us the cleansing process for each and every single one of these sins. It is not necessarily because we're going to be inspired by that. And God's intention in the Torah by telling us of all the punishments for every single sin was not to necessarily inspire us to do them, because otherwise we'll get stoned. But understanding that you get stoned helps you appreciate the importance of that commandment. Let's take a look here at the text. We have learned that when a kosher pleasure is enjoyed out of indulgence, its klipa energy is downgraded and tied to the sitra achra by the three impure klipas, but only temporarily, until you repent and return to the worship of God and His Torah. Are there any long-term repercussions of received energy temporarily from the three impure klipos? So again, we're asking, if you draw upon yourself the three impure klipos, and this is going to be an easier case where you were eating something permitted, but you had a lot of pleasure in it. So he says, also, even after the klipas noga experience has reverted to the holiness from the domain of the three impure klipos, each trace of it remains attached to the body, since all the food and drink became the body's flesh and blood right away. And while consumed for self-gratification, its energy is still under the domain of the three impure klipos. We spoke about this last week, by the way. Therefore, since the body was temporarily home for three impure klipos, the body must undergo chibat, cleansing after death, to cleanse and purify it from its contamination of the kosher worldly pleasures and indulgences, from the impurity of the klipas noga and good demons. We spoke about this last week. I showed you the text from the Zohar, but as he has it here at the bottom of the page, basically, after you die, the angels come to you in your grave and they beat you up. Is it physical? Is it metaphysical? I don't know. I don't want to find out yet. The point is, though, that, again, certain when you bring a certain negative energy into you, it needs to be cleansed. Again, as I mentioned many times, these are cleansings. These are not punishments. These are cleansings to help you be able to elevate yourself. So since these three impure klipos attach yourself in this way, which is the most mild way, all you're going to need is a good body thrashing. Okay? That's simple enough. He says here, by the way, those who live in Israel or those who pass away on Friday are spared chibat hakever. Others can avoid this by loving justice, loving rebuke, loving acts of kindness, bringing guests to one's home and praying with concentration. Another suggestion is to spend 4 hours per day studying words of Torah and Psalms. Okay, so here, if you're interested in saving yourself from this cleansing process, there are things that you can do that can cleanse you of these klipos while you're still alive. All right, so that's an important thing. Now he just says an important thing. A person will, pretty much everybody will have chibat hakever unless they derive no pleasure from this world in their entire life. Like the case of our holy Rabbi Yehuda Anasi, author of the Mishnah, who said on his deathbed that he enjoyed no pleasure from this world. Rabbi Yehuda Anasi was a wealthy man from whose table neither lettuce nor radish nor cucumber was ever absent, either in the summer or the winter. The Tanya cites his example in particular to show that the life of piety does not preclude a person from eating and drinking well. What gives the klipos power is exclusion of God from the picture, indulging purely for self-satisfaction. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi is called our rabbi because he shows us how it is necessary to detach ourselves from the world in order to be pious. That is important. What is important is the intention. So intention is important in the gray area of life. And here what we're pointing out is that if you are holy like Rabbi Yehuda, and you always eat with pure intentions, even if you eat the most pleasurable foods, again, you won't need any of that bodily cleansing process. I'm just going to read this last paragraph here. We'll end over here. The Tanya now turns to another activity which, while permitted by Jewish law, is nevertheless spiritually damaging and requires cleansing after death. As for worthless discussions devoid of Torah content or purpose that is spoken in a permissible manner, for example, an uneducated person who is unable to study Torah and therefore is exempt from the requirement to study Torah at all times, even though the uneducated person did not sin, he must undergo cleansing the soul to purify it from the contamination with this klipa of worthless discussion, which was not dedicated to God. And this is achieved through the soul being flung in kafakela, the hollow of the sling, as described in the Zohar portion of Beshalach, volume 2, page 59a. So again, if you spent your life doing unimportant things and you want to come to heaven and enjoy a spiritual benefit, you need to be cleansed of all this waste of time, right? We have today a lot of killing time. People have to kill time. When you go to heaven, all that time that you kill time, it brings upon you a negative energy. Even if it was sanctioned, it brings upon you a negative energy. And you will need to be cleansed of it through kafakela, the hollow of the sling. I don't know if people are interested in knowing what it is. Okay. Here's kafakela, explains it. In kafakela, the soul enters a world of imagination, thinking it is still alive in this world, and it is drawn into the same inappropriate thoughts to which it had become accustomed. As the soul is flung from thought to thought, experiences pain, which is its cleansing. So again, basically imagine like this. The soul is being flung to like its wasteful life it had on this earth, then it's flung to the spiritual highs. It's like a washing machine, it's going up and down, spiritual, physical, and that cleanses it. This spiritual pain that it experiences cleanses it from its grasp of this world and allows it to clean off. Basically, it's a godly soul that just got items attached to it during its lifetime that it wants to clean off. And then he's going to say in the next paragraph, which I guess we'll have to finish next week, but there's also the purgatory of fire for sins that were done with passion, and there's a purgatory of snow for times that you were too cold and didn't want to do a mitzvah. Regardless, we'll finish reading those off next week, but you get the idea. Again, the point why he's mentioning these punishments is not because he's trying to inspire you with the punishments, but just letting you understand that your actions have spiritual negative consequences, which, unless you cleanse them in this world, will need to be cleansed in the world to come. And that's just how it is. You attach yourselves with a negative spiritual energy, it will have to be cleansed one way or another. And hopefully we all walk away from today with an appreciation that everything around us has a spiritual energy. And that I think that part gives us more inspiration to do the right thing. Not because I understand if I eat the negative thing, I'll be punished in the afterlife. I understand right now it has a negative spiritual energy. Why would I want to attach myself to that negative spiritual energy right now? Why would I want to do that? And similarly, when I have an opportunity to do a mitzvah, I want to attach myself to that positive spiritual energy. Not just because it says it of course, because it says it in the Torah, what I meant to say is not just because I'll get rewarded in the world to come, but the reward of the world to come shows me because right now it has a positive spiritual energy. I want to do that right now. That's my spiel. I'm going to stop the recording. I need to say